Yes, let us go.
Okay. Hi, Warren. Welcome to you. Warren Farrell, you are sometimes called the father of the men's rights movement or the men's movement. You have been called also one of the top 100 global spiritual leaders. You've written numerous books, including including The Myth of Male Power and Why Men Earn More, and most recently, The Boy Crisis, as we can see around you here. And you started over 500 men's groups. So thank you very much for agreeing to have a talk with me today. We are a small group here in Europe called Manifesto that started up with some various gatherings, and we've got in touch with you about getting interested in your work, and we agreed to have a little chat today. So I was wondering if you could just start us off by saying hi and a little bit about yourself, maybe if you want to add anything, and what's on your agenda at the moment. What is happening in your field?
Well, let's see. Background-wise, I started out on the board of directors of the National Organization for Women in New York City back in the late 60s, early 70s, before some of the people that I'm talking to now were born. And so it was a journey through that and speaking around the world on those issues. And then during the 70s, I began to see that there were a lot of divorces. And with those divorces, I saw that a lot of children were having problems. But as I looked more carefully, I saw that the children that did not have a lot of dad involvement after divorce were the ones that were having the serious problems. And the ones that did have a lot of dad involvement, they were having problems, but not to nearly the degree that the ones that did not have, that were what I ended up calling them dad deprived, or having problems. So I brought this up to the board at the National Organization for Women in New York City, and I could feel that there was sort of like a withdrawal from me in terms of support, because their now members were saying that they wanted women to have the option of not having the father involved after divorce, and maybe having a new boyfriend, a new husband, maybe moving out of state or to a different part of the country where they could start again and leave the sourness of the relationship that ended in a divorce behind. But what they weren't considering is what was best for the children. And as the research began to accumulate as to what was best for the children, and what it turned out was that the children after divorce do best when there are four things that are happening, for what I call must-dos of divorce, which is about an equal amount of time between mother and father, no bad-mouthing from mom to dad or dad to mom, dads and moms living within about 20 miles of each other so that the children don't miss their activities and friends and resent the parent that they're going to that's a long distance away, and that there's constant couples communication counseling. And as I began to see all those things and brought those up with the board of Now's response was, well, we don't want to lose Now membership by having women feel that they don't have the right to the children as much as they feel they want after divorce. And I said, well, wait a minute, is this about real equality? And is it about what's best for the children? Or is this about building a stronger political base? And they said, well, we have more issues than just this one issue. We have, a dozen issues that we have to be powerful on. And so this cannot be our primary issue if we want to have an overall power. And so I started to feel, distance from them and they from me. And I realized that this would, ultimately cost me many millions of dollars if I found this research. And I just decided to continue doing what I felt was accurate research and reporting the results without sort of spinning them in favor of one party or one ideology or another. And that did cost me maybe $30 or $40 million over the course of my life, and many awards and things like that. But I feel like I've been able to, make a living saying what I feel is best for both sexes. I don't consider myself a men's rights activist or a feminist. I don't want to be a part of a women's movement that is often blaming men, or a men's movement that is often blaming women. I consider myself part of a gender liberation movement, liberating both sexes from the rigid roles of the past to more flexible roles for the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's definitely something about a kind of a war between the genders that a lot of people perceive today. And we've just had International Women's Day, of course, here. Is that a big thing over there as well?
It is a fairly big thing over here. It's certainly bigger than International Men's Day.
Yeah, yeah.
We've always had what would be called a battle of the sexes. But in the last 50 years, we haven't had a battle of the sexes. We've had a war in which only one side has shown up. And boys and men have put their heads in the sand and hoped the bullets would miss. And that's dangerous, because the problem with masculinity, one of the challenges of masculinity, is that in order to be willing to be the disposable sex, that is, in order to be willing to die in war so that others would live, in order to be willing to take all the hazardous jobs at the 95 or so percent level and be willing to die in the workplace, in order to be willing to be disposable, in order to be called a man, we had to develop heroic intelligence. And heroic intelligence was training for a short life. And now, in the future, we need to be developing health intelligence, training for a long life. And those are very different types of transitions from the old days to the new days. But in the old days, when we developed heroic intelligence, and to a large degree today as well, we learned to keep our mouths shut, to keep our feelings to ourselves. That we knew either directly or indirectly that successful men repressed their feelings. They didn't express their feelings. So now we're getting many claims about toxic masculinity, and the toxic masculinity is partially that we don't share feelings, express vulnerabilities, and so on. That part is accurate, but that part came out of having to keep your mouth shut and do what you needed to do, including die, and not say, I am Jewish and that you're being anti-Semitic, or I am short and you're talking about tall, strong men, or I am, fat and you're talking about thin, lean men. I'm really upset. That type of expression of feelings would just have gotten you a command to do 30 more push-ups. And so men have learned. So part of male toxicity is our repressing our feelings. But now, if we're putting our heads in the sand and hoping the bullets of feminism would miss, we're adding to that toxicity. It's when we're told, when our 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th grade boys are told in school that when they're trying to explain their point of view, they are mansplaining. That accusation of mansplaining is just telling men to shut up. And shutting up has been part of the problem. So if you want the toxicity of masculinity to get less, you have to create safety for men speaking up. You can't have a hashtag #MeToo monologue. You have to have a hashtag #MeToo dialogue. If we're going to change the male-female tango, there has to be, you can't just change part of the tango. If you change any one partner's role in the tango, you have to change both partners' role, and it helps if they're changed together. Otherwise, the tango really gets messed up. And
yeah, we often talk about like that, up until, for all of human history and up about 70 years ago, then men and women were kind of doing separate things a lot of the time, and then that's changed actually quite radically. And it's almost as if, and especially in Scandinavia, we have some of the most gender equal countries in the world. I mentioned that Denmark actually has the highest workplace participation for women in the whole world. But it's almost like we've suddenly woken up now and realized, like, oh, there's some things that that aren't actually functioning yet, and we need to figure out, okay, and that's where I guess you have this idea of the boy crisis that's come in. I just, a statistic came out here in Denmark the other day. I think boys, they still have a kind of draft system for the military, and something, I think it was 45% of boys are now declared not suitable for military service because of psychological issues for the military. So, and that was a big wake-up call. And as you said, it seems like we've had our heads in the ground, or I don't know, what do you think is the reason that we don't talk about this, or don't see this, or don't, a lot of people are very surprised when they see these statistics, right?
Yes, absolutely. And the insights to this, I think, started for me when I was when I was speaking around the world on other books that I'd written, and teachers usually would come up to me, or parents would say, my son is having a problem. What, that's sort of cherry picking. So, but teachers were saying, more boys in my class are having problems than girls. And so that sort of started to click for me. And so then I saw a study of an international study done by the United Nations, and it showed that and when I parsed the research, when I looked into the research, I saw that boys were falling behind girls in every academic subject in the top 63 most developed nations.
Mhm.
And so I said, well, what do developed nations have in common? And what they had in common was two things where there was a boy crisis. One was children after divorce. They had permission for divorce. And after divorce, the children who did not have significant contact with their dads, that was the group of children that were having the most problems. The other group was in the United States. 53% of women in the United States who have children when they're under 30, 53% of them have children without being married. Well, I'm politically liberal, so not being married to not be, it's not a big thing for me. But then I looked more carefully and saw, well, those children, a good portion of them didn't know even who their father was. Others knew who their father was, but barely had contact with him. And others, the mother and father were living together when the child was born. And so I figured, well, that's sort of the equivalent of marriage. Well, it turns out that I was wrong. That after the average amount of time that the child has significant contact with the dad in a relationship where when the child is born, the mother and father are just living together, is only 3.5 to 4 years. So these children got to know their father a little bit, but then they felt abandoned by their father and wondered what was wrong with themselves. And they didn't, but more importantly, I started asking myself, well, what is there about the father that's so important that, that the children who did not have significant father involvement, they, constituted the boy crisis. And the boy crisis, I was able to eventually observe was signified by 70 different sets of problems that boys had. And most of the girls without fathers had these problems also, but less intensely. They also had some different problems, like girls with minimal or no father involvement are much more likely to have children out of wedlock when they're teenagers, and they're much more likely to feel like they need to be sexual with boys too quickly because they don't know males well enough to know how to be able to hold a man's attention and interest on a more subtle set of levels. But
way of getting recognition or feeling seen or something, right?
Exactly, just sort of listening and hearing. And so, for example, children that without a lot of father involvement, they don't know how to handle teasing nearly as well. Dads are far more likely to tease. They're far more likely to do roughhousing. And so, this is just one of 10 different examples of the differences between mother and father involvement. But the roughhousing, children who do roughhousing with their dads build a bond with their dads that allows the dad to do a lot more boundary enforcement. They are much more likely to be empathetic. So you don't think of roughhousing and being empathetic as being it's counterintuitive.
Naturally connected.
I'll be happy to explain in a moment why those two go
We saw the Gillette ad recently that had two boys roughhousing and the good dad coming and stopping them, right? So
yes, exactly. Now, dad stopping the roughhousing is helping the boys be better, but in fact, it is not. In that roughhousing example in the Gillette ad, the more that children do roughhousing with dads, not only do they learn to be more empathetic, but they also learn to distinguish being assertive from being aggressive. So I'll give you an example, the dynamic of that I saw being true in all 10 of the differences between what I came to call in my research for the boy crisis, dad-style parenting versus mom-style parenting. Dads will say, okay, let's wrestle. And the kids will get all excited. And let's say there's 3 kids and he throws all 3 kids on the couch. And the job is for the 3 kids to jump off the couch onto his back and pin him down before he can pin all 3 of them down together. Mm-hmm. And so the dad throws the kids on the couch and the mom is like, oh my God, I feel like I have just one more child to monitor here. And she's saying to herself, okay, the kids look like they're having fun, but I don't want to be controlling and interfere. But on the other hand, I just predict that sooner or later there'll be somebody's going to end up crying, somebody's going to get hurt, and she's only about 100% likely to be right. And so
Exactly.
and so the children jump on the dad's back, and they're going back and forth, and finally one of the boys puts his elbow in his sister's eye, and the sister starts crying, and the mother hears the sister in the cry and says, "Oh, finally, Dad will learn that I was right." And so, but then Dad says, "Okay, Jimmy, you can't stick your elbow in Jane's eye. And if you do that again, we'll stop the roughhousing." So then Dad continues the roughhousing, and Mom's going, "No, didn't you learn your lesson? Stop the roughhousing." That's what created the problem. But by Dad, because he's developed this bond where he's like a roller coaster filled with excitement and fun, and the kids know they want more roughhousing, so they go. So they agree with Dad that they'll consider each other's feelings, and so but. As psychologists talk about having emotional intelligence under fire, when they all want to win at the roughhousing, they lose the desire to empathize because it competes with their desire to beat the other sister or brother, to be the kingpin or the kingpinners. And so while this is occurring, somebody violates the being thoughtful of brother or sister again, or they, instead of being assertive, they're aggressive. And so Dad said, "Okay, John, I told you we can't do that," and we would end the roughhousing. So there'll be no more roughhousing till tomorrow night. "Oh, Dad, we'll pay attention this time." You had your opportunity. No more roughhousing till tomorrow night. That's the normal father styling. But dads don't explain to Mom what's happening in that. Aside from a bond being created, Dad can use that bond as leverage to be able to say to the children, there will be no more roughhousing, and the children don't sort of rebel against that because Dad's a lot of fun and they have a lot of connection with him, and so they complain, but they ultimately go along with the be thoughtful of your sister or brother. But when the child does do the roughhousing and Dad says there'll be no more roughhousing till tomorrow night, it's the next night, when after they've lost their privilege to roughhouse for the rest of that night, the following night when Dad says you can't do this but you can do that, the kids are tuned into that because they know they will have lost the roughhousing.
Yeah, they know there's consequences, so you're actually learning discipline and
exactly. You're learning the single biggest ingredient that predicts success, which is postponed gratification.
Yes,
and
the Oreo or the marshmallow experiment, right? That's
exactly Michelle's marshmallow experiment at Stanford years ago showed that the children that had the postponed gratification were most likely to be predicted to have success. Many other experiences of that show that to be the case. And here's where the catastrophe lies. The boy and girl who don't have that postponed gratification, they can't finish their homework at school. They may be good at gymnastics or basketball or football, but they can't do all the drill. They can't have the discipline to do all the drills and the routines. So boys in particular start feeling like, oh, they're not honored at school. The teachers don't feel that they're that special. Their peers don't feel that that's special. Mom and dad isn't proud of them. And when it comes to boy-girl time, the boys may hear comments that women love sensitive men. But in fact, the women don't go out with the most sensitive men. They go out, particularly in the United States, with the performers, with the winners, and the guys that are best at soccer, best at football, best at or best at school, or student body president. They go out with the heroes, and so the boys start feeling, well, I'm sensitive. Why don't the girls pay attention to me? I'm angry that they say the one thing and they do something else, and they begin to withdraw, feeling that they're not a winner in any area. So they withdraw into not just video games, but video game addiction, and not just playing, but withdrawing into that. And the same with porn and male-female time. Boys want to not be rejected, of course, like everybody. And so they withdraw into pornography, which is basically access to a variety of attractive women without feeling rejected at a price they can afford. And so obviously video porn is available easily to them. but porn addicts the brain. That is, it brings dopamine to the brain when they take increased risks with females. And so when they get their first real life female, and she feels like she's just being treated like some object from a porn movie, the woman withdraws and rejects him, and which only sends him back into depression and into porn. And then that can lead to depression. That can lead to the much greater suicide rate between boys and girls in their early 20s and late teens. And that can lead to an enormous amount of anger, which in the United States, with the availability of guns, can also lead to all the mass shootings. And so when I did the research for the boy crisis, what I also found is that more than 90% of the mass shooters were dad-deprived boys. I then studied ISIS recruits, found that more than 90% of ISIS recruits were dad-deprived boys or dad-deprived girls, in the much smaller percentage of girls, of course. Mm-hmm. And then I looked at the prisoners. We all knew that the prison population in the United States is 93% male. Mm-hmm. But what we didn't look at was that that 93% male prison population, more than 90% of them were dad-deprived boys. Mm-hmm. And so that gave me an understanding of, I started out looking at 10 causes of the boy crisis and found that, in fact, of the 10 causes, the boy crisis was at the hub of the cause, and everything else was secondary. There's mental illness problems. There's problems with committing crimes. There's problems with lack of motivation. But all of those problems are most directly connected to dad deprivation.
Yeah. So you and I mean, it's a lot of stuff, and you started actually, I think, with the time with fathers and mothers and a couple staying together, and you said something about that, you're liberal, so you never really weighed marriage that much, but has that been a shift then in your perspective, or in I mean, obviously a mother and a father staying together when they have children, and that's something that we've spoken about in the men's movements as well. It's like, what in Scandinavia, to a very high degree, we're seeing less and less people staying together for a long time. Copenhagen is the world's capital for singles, people living by themselves in single apartments. So do you see that reversing at some point, or where are we heading with that?
Yes, I have no problems with people living together before they're married or when they don't have children. I have seen that two things must happen when you have children. One is that marriage really does matter. That children born into homes where their partners are married are far more likely to have father and mother involvement, both for the course of their growing up years. And
do you have an idea why marriage makes an impact?
Yeah, I think it's just a level of commitment. There is when we have a part of our brain called the RCZ, which is the rostral cingulate zone. That zone is especially affected by a great deal of dopamine, the feel-good drug. That when there is approval from friends, from neighbors, from families, and so on. And so when we get married, we're like taking all the people that can reasonably be there at that marriage ceremony, and we're saying to them, we are a partner forever. So there's a type of feeling of, we've just upped the ante of our commitment to each other. We've said for better or for worse. Mm-hmm. We've made, and we don't, and there's a sort of certain amount of disgrace, shame, sadness. Mm-hmm. Shame is mostly a bad emotion, but it has its function, which is to sort of like make you work harder before you get that divorce. Now, that said, I am not interested in people having legislation being used to make divorce more difficult. The solution is not legislation. The solution is communication. If you don't have good communication, you may be legally married but psychologically divorced. I see a lot of people, especially with children, living in what I've come to call minimum security prison marriages, and I don't want that. That is why, after I began to do around the country couples communications training, because I've seen that couples, the single biggest challenge in relationships is our inability to handle personal criticism without becoming defensive. And so, but as I looked at that more carefully, I realized that it's biologically natural to become defensive when your partner criticizes you. I say biologically natural because historically speaking, when another kinship network or tribe criticized our tribe, it was a potential enemy. So we learned the tribes that survived got up their defenses to defend against the enemy before the enemy killed them. Or alternatively, they killed the enemy before the enemy killed them. And so,
what was the term you used? A minimum security marriage, prison marriage.
Yes.
What is that? I didn't. What was that?
Yes, a minimum security prison marriage is where you sort of you can escape the prison of being married, but because you have children, you don't. So it's a minimum security prison, but you feel like you're in a prison. And anyone that's been married and had a divorce and knows that, in those days or months or years before they get divorced, there's very few things that are more lonely than going to bed with somebody that you feel is just, is your marriage partner and also feels like your enemy at the same time. And that's an awful feeling. So I started working on how do I get around that feeling. And part of the couples work that I do is teaching people how to create a conflict-free zone for 166 hours a week, to how to alter their biologically natural state when their partner is criticizing them. So I have nobody that goes through my workshops. They may get criticized during the week, but they learn how to handle that criticism in a way that I teach them that allows them to save that discussion for the 2 hours a week. And before they get engaged in that discussion, they alter their biologically natural state into a state where they're receptive to being able to handle whatever their partner needs or wants to say, and then be able to share that story. And so it's a step beyond active listening that has ended up being extremely effective. And so many, many marriages have been saved from that. But it's not just the saving of the marriages, it's people feeling that they're so happy and to be together, they're in love again. That's the goal of my couples communication workshops. And when that goal succeeds, which it usually does, that prevents the divorce. When the divorce is prevented in a positive way rather than a minimum security prison marriage way, when the divorce is prevented, then the children have access to both parents in a fully engaged way. And so that's part of the way of preventing the boy crisis.
Yeah. So do you believe that in your workshops, do men and women have different roles, or do you see in Manifesto, one of the basic assumptions that we've taken with our work is that there are biological differences between men and women. And so when you go into these couple communication network workshops, then is there a difference, or is it very much just two completely equal people, or how do you manage that dynamic given the differences we see between men and women? How do you work with that as far as the communication goes?
There are clearly differences between men and women, and anyone that doesn't know that is just not looked at.
We have had people arriving at our workshop sometimes claiming opposite. But, yeah.
However, when it comes to communication, it doesn't really make any difference. I have in my workshops, many gay couples, to me, I define a couple as any two people with a past who want a future with better communication. So I have mothers and sons, fathers and daughters, and any parents and children have employers, employees, although very, very rarely that, although I train businesses in this same thing where employees and employers get together and hear each other. So let's say the male and female story are very different, and which they are. So the job in communication is for the male to completely hear his wife's story or his woman friend's story, and to be able to hear it in such a way that even when it incorporates a great deal of criticism of him, that because he's willing usually to die for her so that she would live, he puts in perspective, like, well, wait a minute, if I would be willing to risk my life to die for you, the least I can do is listen to you. That's fewer negative consequences than death. And so with training like that, I get every man and woman to listen to each other, and it doesn't matter what the differences in their biology is or their story. The daughter is at maybe at 11 or 12 years of age. And so her age difference, her generational difference, her biological difference, whatever differences she has, the only job of the other person who's her partner, who wants to love her more deeply, is to hear how she experiences those differences and what her life, what her way of interpreting her view of the person she's critical of is. And so that's the primary job there.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I skipped over something before that I want to maybe elaborate on, because you had asked, core, what is one of the core differences that I discuss in the boy crisis versus, and that I see overlapping with the European men's gathering, and that is the difference between our former training of boys to have what I would call heroic intelligence,
mm-hmm.
and versus what we want for our sons, which is to have health intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And in the past, we trained our sons for heroic intelligence, which is training for not only a short life, but also training not to share how you feel when somebody criticizes you, but to keep it to yourself and be a man and be strong, and without realizing that men's weakness is our facade of strength. And
Mm-hmm.
so, whereas being able to get in touch with what's bothering us and hurting us and sharing it before it builds up into a volcano and we come out being overly forceful in our voice or come out physically because we don't know how to express our feelings otherwise. So that training for health intelligence is part of the transition we all need to make in this next generation. That is, the training that made our boys successful in the past is different from the training and the upbringing that will make our sons successful in the future. And so we have to understand that transition from heroic intelligence to health intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that was good about the past is that boys that learned to grow up to be disposable as warriors or disposable in hazardous jobs, they at least had a sense of purpose. Mm-hmm. Today, there are many fewer boys needed to die in war, thank goodness. And the women are sharing the economic burdens to a greater degree. Mm-hmm. So there's no longer two senses of purpose that men used to have. One is to die in war, and the other one was to risk their lives being disposable in the workplace and to have to put so much of all their identity in the workplace. So the good news is there's less need for that. The bad news is that we have developed a purpose void. And what I've discovered is that boys with a purpose void that then grow up in a family where there's a dad void, is that the purpose void plus the dad void is what creates a combination of the boy is looking to his father for guidance, but there's no father there for guidance. His father seems to be abandoning him. In divorce relationships, he often hears bad things about his father. So he looks in the mirror and wonders if I'll be a liar or a narcissist or irresponsible like mom says dad is. And so he feels like, my genes, he looks in the mirror and sees the same type of eyes or hair or body language or nose that the dad has, and feels like, senses that I'm half my dad. Well, if I'm half my dad and my dad is terrible, maybe I'm also terrible inherently. And that's part of what gets a boy to feel really sad about himself. So part of what I'm suggesting that the European Men's Gathering discuss is the development of father warriors. And telling boys from first grade and second grade that one of your new senses of purpose will not be to die on the killing field, but to help your son become a better man on the loving field called home. And here is the way to do that. And the way to do that is to both be mentored when you're in kindergarten, first, second, third, fourth, fifth grade, and also to have somebody that you mentor. You are training yourself to be a good leader. And we find the studies of when we did the research for the boy crisis, I found that being mentored was very helpful for boys. But even more helpful statistically was being a mentor, because the boy who mentored a boy who was younger found that every behavior he went about doing, if I punch somebody out, how will that look to the boy that I'm mentoring? Will that be a good example for him? And so he's channeling everything he's thinking about doing. If I steal something from the store and I get caught, if I join a gang, if I deal drugs and I'm put in prison, how will that look
What
to the
age
boy I'm
do
mentoring?
boys just start mentoring? I'm curious at like where do you see that can start playing a role?
A boy is 7, 8 years of age, and then he has as a playmate, maybe a boy or a friend of the family, a boy who's really not doing well, and the mothers and fathers get together and say, how about Jimmy, spending when I was younger, for example, I maybe was in the 9th grade, and a mother approached me and said, Johnny, I don't want to give his last name, Johnny really is having a lot of problems. Would you play with him, maybe a few days a week? I want him to have a friend like you. So not only did I say yes, but I felt, my goodness, there's something special about me. But I also began to look at myself like, I wanted to be an example to John. So I didn't have tendencies to do, sort of beat people up and things like that. But on the other hand, I was very much like you described your son before we were talking. I sort of was into sports and into school. And that's what the mother appreciated.
So you think that's something that parents could really do more of, is engaging their boys in helping other kids that aren't doing just as well?
Exactly. And you can do it. You can start it out easily with, doing things like giving out, helping homeless people, going to a homeless shelter and helping people who are less fortunate, and having your son be with you. So he gets some example of what it's like to help other people, and how important it is not to solve people's problems, but to listen to their problems and to empathize with their problems. That solutions are the last things you want to give when you're a good mentor. What you want to give is plenty of space for the person to share what's bothering them, and then ask them what they think they can do to solve their problems. Because for the most part, the solution to most people's problems is somewhere inside of them. And when you ask them what they think is the solution that is best, the child or the younger person, the person you're working with, usually can come up with their own solution. And when they discover their own solution, they respect themselves a lot more. And so discovering their own solution is part of the solution.
I wanted to ask a little bit more about, you mentioned about the shift from hero mentality to health mentality, and that mindset. And I was just thinking in the light of, there's the APA guidelines that have recently come out about dealing with boys and men, which have basically said that, traditional masculinity is harmful and dangerous. At the same time, we have Jordan Peterson, who talks a lot about the hero's journey, right? And that goes back to Joseph Campbell as well. But like, as the going on this hero's journey as an kind of an inbuilt, almost hardwired part of being a human being that aspires us or that lifts us up. So I'm just trying to understand where you are saying, like, as far like how plastic do you think men are? How much can we change them? According to the APA, we can just change masculinity, right? And do you still see, when I think about taking my boy down to help maybe some homeless people, then I'm thinking like, I'd like to inspire him as well to be able to see that there is like a deeper meaning to life as such, of helping others, that actually is more than just your own selfish needs, or kind of the things that 15-year-olds now these days impress each other with, right? So yeah, but how does it play in there? What are you saying?
So many levels. The APA was right about one thing. They did acknowledge that there needs to be significant father involvement, and we need to credit them for that. They did acknowledge also, the second level of credit is that there are challenges with masculinity, but where the APA completely misses the point is that they're talking about male privilege and male power. and men being part of the patriarchy. Nothing could be further from the truth than that analysis of masculinity. The male privilege is when men felt obligated to to die in war, it was so others would live. Sacrifice is not male privilege. Being willing to think in World War I, there were tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of boys that even though the age to get involved in World War I, to be drafted, was 18, many, many boys felt that they needed to serve the country at age 15, 16, and 17. And so you had boys way before the age of consent being willing to sacrifice themselves. This is part of heroic masculinity. But to call that male privilege and to call it power to feel obligated as a man to earn money that somebody else spends while he dies sooner is not male privilege. If I were to tell a group of women, come to my female empowerment workshop, I'm going to train you to feel obligated to earn money that somebody else spends while you die sooner. The women would be smart enough to kick me out before I started. But I'm going to give you equality. One of the ways I'm going to give you equality is that because for the last thousands of years, men have been drafted at an early age, and we're going to give you reparations for that. For the next thousands of years, women will be the only sex to be drafted on any war that we have, and only women will die. But men will become the civilized sex that you wanted us to be. We'll be home, take care of the children. We'll empathize, we'll love, and so on. And when you come home a killer with PTSD, commits suicide, and are completely deranged, or you come home in a body bag, we'll say that you have the privilege, you have the power.
Well, there are lots of American men's rights organizations that are now calling for women to be included in the draft as well, right? What do you think about that? Is that a good idea?
Well, yes, it is a good idea. It's not a good idea to have a draft necessarily, but to have a society where we say women are equal and in many ways more than equal to men, and then to say that only your son at the age of 18 has to register for the draft, but your daughter doesn't have to do anything. She doesn't have to register for any type of obligation whatsoever. But your son has to register for potential to, that if there is a draft, we have a whole cadre of people we can call from, and they're all males that have already pre-registered, and we know where they are, et cetera. And if your son doesn't do that, by the way, he'll risk years in prison. He'll risk a $250,000 fine. He'll risk he won't be able in 40 some odd states. He will not be able to get a driver's license. He will not be able to go to a college that gets any federal funding at all, which is pretty much every college, and so on. So you're basically wiping him out, and in exchange for him being willing to do that, you get the privilege to vote. Oh, but in exchange for women getting the privilege to vote, you have to do nothing. You just exist.
Yeah, but is it? I mean, the male and female equality doesn't necessarily mean treating them the same, right? So wouldn't you say that males are more biologically geared towards, for example, going to war in the military than women, and that there are other things that women are more biologically kind of suited to?
I definitely would agree with that. But women have passed legislation to allow them to have the option to be in combat and to be in every other military position. Mm-hmm. So we have a dual society occurring, which is that women have the law allows for women to have the option to do anything, and for men to have the obligation to do that. That's not equality. Yeah. And so what might happen if I were and had enough power to make this happen, what I would do is to say that at the age of 18, that both boys and girls must say what they check a number of boxes as to what they could contribute to the world, to society. Can they contribute as a caretaker? Can they contribute in this way, or in a different type of way? And then when that type of need occurs in a society, then we call on somebody who has one of those boxes checked to do those types of things, so that we ask both girls and boys to be part of a national service in different ways. I think probably being a year in national service when you, as part of a rite of passage, to be an adult is a good idea. Now, that doesn't mean that boys and girls at the age of 18 are going to do the same things, but we would try to have some type of commission, create something that, this is of equal value to that. We would find that more males would do certain things and more females would do other things. Mm-hmm. That's okay, as long as they both serve in different ways. And we don't give one we've created a world of multi-option women and no-option men. When men and women are married and they're about to have children, and the woman becomes pregnant, I've seen many families where the man and woman will sit around the table together, and and everybody will say, well, what are you going to do, sweetie? The dad says to the daughter, are you going to work? Are you going to be with the kids? You're going to do some combination of both. And everybody listens to the daughter who's pregnant talk about, well, if I work full time, this is the plus side and this is the negative side. And she generates those three options of work full time, children full time, or do some combination of both. Mm-hmm. The guys, on the other hand, they're sitting by and going, well, I have three options too. Option one is to work full time. Option two is to work full time. And option three is to work full time. Mm-hmm. Well, that's an example of the era of the multi-option woman and the no-option man, even as the woman is still claiming to be the victim. And so we now have in the United States, 60% of college graduates, almost 60% of college graduates are female, but we're still giving scholarships to women for STEM professions. We're not giving scholarships to men to enter into the helping professions or other professions where males are in the minority, where we still have enormous discrimination against dads who want to be involved with the children after divorce. Very few people are questioning that. And almost every state law allows the advantage to be for the woman, the mother after divorce, unless she is found to be a drug addict or in some way extremely irresponsible. She is given the opportunity to be the primary parent if she desires to be the primary parent. These are laws of drastic unfairness to our children who are then deprived of their dad. And they're laws that also hurt men, not for the normal reasons that we hear. I have the right to my children. It's not about the right to your children. It's about your children's need for both parents. And when your child doesn't have a dad in the picture, the dad loses his sense of purpose. The child grows up, especially the boy, looking to a man and his dad, seeing that his dad is drifting, his purposelessness, and doesn't look forward to a world where he's married, where he may end up getting a divorce and then lose his children and have to be paying money for children that he can't see. That doesn't look like a world that he wants to enter and work hard to be a part of and have a sense of purpose.
Yeah, and the sense of purpose is really something that we're very much seeing as well as tough. I think for a lot of people these days, young people then playing online games, that's where you can get to be the hero, right? That seems to answer to these natural tendencies or draws. And in the real world, we've even lost a lot of the jobs which we, in agriculture and factories and stuff like that, are less and less becoming available. I think even the military has IQ tests now where something like 20% of applicants, if they don't get high enough results on the IQ test, even the military can't even use people anymore, right? So maybe the question I want to ask is what do we do to help build men's emotional intelligence, ability to communicate, and especially, and the European Men's Gathering is very much a group of men who are working with us professionally. And, we're seeing more and more that it's starting to break through to the mainstream. But what do you think are the elements that are needed to really get through to, people who are decision makers in organizations that this can really have an impact at a broader level?
The way you're framing this question is really outstanding, because one of the things I realized as I was looking through, doing the research for the boy crisis, is that I needed solutions for families. I needed solutions for single moms. I needed solutions for schools, and I needed solutions for policymaking. And I needed solutions also for a whole cultural message to be sent to men and to women about men. And so so I'm a little bit overwhelmed because I spent 11 years sort of putting all those solutions there, but I'll just give you a few examples. Mm-hmm. When it comes to, I think what the single most important thing that we need to do is to have communication training in first, second, third grade, and right on through every level of school, with levels of sophistication honed based on the level of maturity and mental sophistication of the children, and at the same time have that communication training for the parents of those children that are getting the training. If you have children getting communication training in first and second grade, and they're able to hear and listen to each other effectively, and then they go home and see their mom and dad arguing defensively, they'll lose respect for their parents, and then that destabilizes the family in a different way. So you've solved one problem, created another, and so you have to work on both of those at the same time. Second, we need to develop in that communication. We need to transmit two important messages to our daughters and our sons. One is that if you're a daughter and you're the type of girl that wants to be a have-it-all woman, you want to have a really good career, you sense that you're really a potent person, but you also want to have a good marriage, and you also want to have your children raised well. Well, there's a solution, but the solution is not being introduced to you. The solution is that there's millions of men out there. That is, when the Pew Research Center, PEW Research Center, which is a liberal research center, for the first time asked men who are full-time working men, would you rather be full-time working men or would you rather be full-time dads? And they were shocked when 49% of men said that they would prefer to be full-time dads, but they were full-time working, though nobody ever asked them what they preferred before, because they felt that that's what their family needed them to do, and the family needs money. And so here we have a perfect solution right in the waiting. The solution to the have-it-all woman is to not seek a man out at a party that is just likely to be earning as much or more than you, but seek a man out at a party who you sense has the emotional intelligence and the nurturing skills and the patience to be a good father and wants to be a good father. But the second message we need to send to men is that that the children who are raised in intact families and have a lot of father involvement or are raised predominantly by the dad, that those children do better than any other demographic of children that we're able to identify. So that there's a win-win situation here. The big win is for the children. The second big win is for the mother, who can be focused on her career largely. But what we know about mothers who are focused on their careers is they don't get so carried away that they neglect their children as a rule. They come back for the important recitals and the birthdays, and they still are texting and keeping in touch with their children, even when they're CEOs. Third, we need to send a huge message to our sons that the greatest sense of purpose that you could have is to be a father warrior. And you need to plan from that, from this communication class that we have you in first and second grade, all the way up to babysitting for your younger brother or sister, all the way up to babysitting for next door neighbors and people, people and friends, all the way up to mentoring, to being a Boy Scout, a Cub Scout, learning some of the traditional masculine things, preserving the best of what is wonderful about masculinity, and not about and getting rid of and being willing to drop about the part where you have to repress all your feelings in order to be liked and loved, where you have to go around have a facade of weakness. And so this means confronting our son, not confronting our son, introducing our sons to a new opportunity. But it also means introducing our daughters to a new opportunity and confronting our daughters about always choosing men who are earning more and then saying you want something on the social, emotional intelligence level when you've chosen based on the monetary intelligence level.
Mm-hmm. And you believe that we can change that? I mean, that this is something that we see culturally, and do you believe that the attraction, the chemistry of attraction, we can consciously alter that as a civilization? And
we have many brain instruments to do that. First of all, we're not going to do it on a majority level. There is that introduction of inherent, men choosing to be heroes. But what we've seen about men as heroes is, the Vikings were one of the most violent, groups of people in history. But then in England, they often married in the same villages that they had burned down. And the next, when the country was not at war, those men were nurturing, caring parents. And so men and women both have enormous amounts of adaptability. I remember, I'm 75 years old, and when I was growing up, I got involved in these issues in 1969. And at the beginning, people said that, women can't be lawyers, they can't be medical doctors, they can't do this and that. Well, we've seen that they were wrong, because part of what is common to men and women is neuroplasticity, is adaptability, is the people who adapt. And the way that we get people to adapt is we give them different psychological rewards. We give them what I call social bribes. And so throughout the Boy Crisis book, I talk about the thousands of conscious and unconscious ways that social bribes are introduced to our sons and our daughters. And we have a choice as to understanding what are these conscious and unconscious social bribes. When I'm sitting with a group of men and, I'm a dad and I'm going, yeah, look at that guy. He played with a broken, he has a dislocated shoulder, and he's still out there leading the team and playing. And what does that tell your son about whether or not to pay attention to that dislocated shoulder? And that's a social bribe for your. And you go out and you see your son actually playing with a dislocated shoulder yourself, and you're saying, son, my son, look at that son. That's my son out there. That's my son out there. We don't ask the question, what is the brother of that son thinking when his dad only cheers for the brother that's risking his life? What about, as opposed to the brother that is maybe mentoring somebody else or doing well in school? And so there's thousands of social bribes like that we must study, learn, and ask ourselves, are these the messages we want to send our son for the next generation? There will be boys who will want to be warriors and be in the military service. The only thing I'm asking us to do as parents is to make sure that they're not wanting to be in the military service because they feel we will love them more and respect them more if they are. Let it be from their own personality, their own decision making, and letting them know that we will love them no matter what they choose to do, as long as it's helping other people, caring and contributing, and has a sense of purpose. Not if you just follow a stereotype of masculinity or femininity.
Yeah. So, I mean, if at the moment we see what you're saying is, and I can recognize the picture with a lot of men who seem to be seeking towards, softer versions of masculinity. And I think Scandinavia is very far ahead of that, and definitely more paternal leave as well. And at the same time, it seems more that we're very much still that the ideal for women is very much also to go out and achieve and to have a lot of career. So that's a shift happening in society. I'm curious, what do you think? How does that change society when we have more females that are, definitely in politics, we see laws being taken over by women, and more men in more carer kind of positions. Yeah. What do you think that does to our society? Where are we headed long term?
Well, if we're shaming the men who don't achieve and praising the women who do achieve, we have a lot of achievers. But what we don't have is a lot of good parents. And so we have three parents, the dad, the mom, and the state. And what we know now is that the children really need good parenting at a very early age from their biological parents. It's the biological parents that really key the child into sort of looking at the half of himself. This is my daddy. This is a lot of what I'll be like. This is my mom. This is a lot of what I'll be like. And feeling that stability of having that person be their primary caretaker for a while. So what we find from children that the dad style parenting, and what is, if a person reads The Boy Crisis and they read any portion of the book, first check out the differences between dad style parenting and mom style parenting. What we find is that the children who do the best are the ones that have what I would call checks and balance parenting. That is, mothers are doing the traditional female role of protecting, or often overprotecting, nurturing, creating security from sort of saying, I'll give you unconditional love. Dads give unconditional love, but they tend to do it with more conditional approval. That is, they say, part of my loving you unconditionally is that I will let you, that I will stop the roughhousing if you don't, if you continue to be too rough on your sister and put the elbow in her eye, so to speak.
I'm not going to allow you to become a bad person or something like
I'm
that.
not going to allow you to become a bad person. And if you steal, I'm not going to say, this only means I'm going to talk with you about it. I talked with you once before about stealing. You've stolen again. This means here are the consequences. I'm not going to put those consequences off a half a dozen times until I get so angry that I overdo the consequences, then feel guilty about overdoing the consequences, and then have to make up for it and have you become my parent again. And so this happens in 1,000 different ways. Electronics at the table, family dinner nights are so important. In the United States, I'm encouraging the Democratic and Republican candidates to create a White House Council on Boys and Men. I'm encouraging schools to have male teachers at equal numbers to female teachers at a very early age, but also in areas like inner cities where there's about 70% of the children are being raised without their dads in some inner city areas, then about 70% of the teachers in elementary school should be male teachers so that the children don't go from a female-only home to a female-only school, and then we wonder why they're attracted to drug dealers who are authoritarian or gang leaders who are authoritarian.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. Great. Then I think we just have a couple of minutes left. Maybe just last question. What would your advice be to young men out there, Warren, for any guys who are kind of setting out and about to navigate this field of career and relationships and what to do with their lives, finding their purpose? What we say is the core things.
Yes. First of all, if you don't have, get involved with your equivalent of Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts, Mankind Project, which is international. Get involved with groups of other men. If you're very faith-based in your orientation, get involved with other males your age from a faith-based community. Find a mentor. Find somebody to mentor. Start doing positive things for other people in the world, so you see what taps into you from a sort of visceral place as to what really gives you a feeling of sense of purpose. Ask yourself, go through the Boy Crisis book and look up social bribes. See whether you have been doing what you're doing in order to get approval from groups of people, as opposed to doing what you're doing by looking inside of yourself and saying, what rings true as me and my personality? Am I naturally feel like something inside of me rings a bell when I'm a firefighter and I really like helping people in that way? The answer is maybe yes, and it's going to definitely be yes for more males than females. But on the other hand, if you're the type of male that gets your greatest amount of satisfaction from helping somebody else in a caring type of way, then learn how to make a living doing that, and also make sure that you try everything that you can do. If you're living in a family where you don't have a lot of father involvement, to persuade mom to get the father re-involved, and to get the father involved on an equal level where he can enforce boundaries with you, because it's the enforcement of boundaries that creates your ability to have postponed gratification, which allows you to be more likely and willing to achieve and discover who you are, who your unique self is, not who society's interpretation of who you should be is. And I think maybe the single most important piece of advice I can give is males and females are not about what the feminist movement has told us about oppressors versus oppressed. We are all in the same family boat. Whenever any one sex wins, then both sexes lose.
Excellent advice. Thank you very much. Thanks for your time. Greatly appreciated.
It's been a real pleasure talking with you. You're a good question asker, and you listen really well.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you.